And so, with the company of angels and saints, we sing the hymn of your praise as we say it together. Holy, 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 Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of your glory. Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest.
There are many challenges ahead for the Catholic Church. How will they cope or fail to cope with these challenges? Could potentially lead to the further fall of the Church, or will it rise in the face of adversity? Father Declan Shannon is the administrator of St Mary's Parish in Athlone. He was ordained in 1995. In 2016, he celebrates his 21st year in the priesthood. We spent the Sabbath day with Father Declan. He was very honest during this time.
Particularly when I see fathers with their children, there's something about that always touches me, to see a father with his child. You realise, you never share that moment, that this is your child.
There is a lot of responsibility that comes with being a priest. People need help, guidance and support. How does one settle on the fact that they are going to dedicate their life to this?
I have very clear memories as a child of taking 3 kitchen stools upstairs to our landing and making an altar. And my oldest sister had won a dancing competition, and I used the cup that she had won at the dancing competition as a chalice. And my younger brothers and sisters, I wanted them to come up to Mass. I was reenacting Mass. So you want to say I was playing Mass. Now, I'm sure lots of kids at a particular age might have done that. As I got older, I suppose I felt this longing in me. There was something in me that I felt. People use this thing about a calling, and what does a calling mean? When you feel compelled or drawn or attracted to this, that there's something about this that it's whetting your appetite. You want to hear more of this. Now, that sounds fine on a level, but when I got to my teenage years in secondary school, I was now fighting this attraction. I didn't want to know anything about it, because bear in mind, it was very much counter-cultural. There were none of my classmates, well, sorry, I shouldn't say none, there was one other guy in my class, my Leaving Cert class, that also went to Maynooth that year. And now I was beginning to reject it. But it seemed the more I rejected it, the more it began to harp at me. And almost I got to the point where I called a truce with God. I said, look, I'll give it a shot. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, leave me alone. And I think he won that argument. So I gave it the shot, and I went to Maynooth on the 4th of September 1988, and here I am 21 years after priesthood, and 5 years of 6 years in the seminary. Hand on heart, I get as much joy of it now as I did then, probably more.
People have turned their backs on the church, with particular low attendance from the younger generations. How will the church tackle this problem?
It's interesting, with one of the roles I have, not so much in the parish, more in the diocese, is that I'm the youth director on our diocesan pilgrimage to Lourdes. And every year I bring between 25 and 30 teenagers to work on it. You see, there's incredible goodness in young people, much more than is given credit. And oftentimes, well, they're a huge search for meaning in their own lives, but they're also looking for opportunity to make a difference in others. And these people are coming to Lourdes with us for 5 days, pushing somebody in a wheelchair that's the same age as them. And somehow they see that there's another aspect to the church that appeals to them, that you actually make a difference in somebody's life. So, going back to what I said from the very outset of the interview, is that you have an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. That thirst is still in our young people, and we need to satisfy that, but we need to listen to the voice of God. I remember asking one of my Leaving Certs, we're talking about, their own parish, and would it make any difference if there was never a church in it, or never a priest in it, or there was never Mass said in it? And these are kids who mightn't describe themselves as being overtly religious, but somehow when you took it off them, they became very possessive of it. I remember doing another class with Leaving Certs talking about baptism and saying, should children of non-practicing parents be baptised? And the challenge for them was, well, you have no right to stop it. Yes, okay, but don't stop the baptism of the child, but do you baptise a child into a faith that is never brought up in? Then begin to look at, okay, I see your argument. In other words, you don't become a member of a golf club and not play golf. There's challenge for all of us in this. And there's no simple answer for it. So again, I suppose I see that it's an evolving thing. But yes, we need to reflect on the reality of where we are now.
There are not many professions that would consider those aged 45 working in the profession as young. But this is the case when it comes to priests in the Catholic Church in Ireland.
I still feel the new kid on the block because there hasn't come lots of kids after me. Now, there are very few institutions that you'll work in that you'll be 21 years in it and still feel the new kid on the block. The future of the church is without doubt in its lay people. One of the things when you look at Irish history, you realise that Irish history was what some people might describe as one that was saturated with priests, that they were just so plentiful. And then here now there's a scarcity. But then if you look at it globally, I mean, it's one thing to look at it as a micro issue, but you look at the macro and you realise that the developing world, look at South America, look at various countries in Africa, where the church is, where the Catholic Church is blossoming. And there's something about the kind of the highs and the lows, and that in many ways I think Ireland had taken its religious identity for granted, and now it's beginning to look more at it. Sometimes I think when things are so plentiful, they're taken for granted, whereas when there's a degree of sacrifice, then we begin to look at how important is this for me. So that is a very real question for the church. It's one thing for it to be a question for the church, but if you believe that God has formed the church, given us the church, well then one of the fundamental things he said was, I'll be with you always, yes, until the end of time. So the church is bigger than me, and it's bigger than the bishops, and it's bigger than the Pope. And having said that, it's about listening. What is the Spirit telling us to do? There are two very kind of fundamental issues that always come to the fore at a time like this. And one is looking at the ordination of women, and the other is to look at the issue of a married clergy, and that would both or either contribute to increasing the numbers of priests, be they male or female. Does God intend there to be a married clergy, or does he not? Does he intend there to be a women priesthood or not?
Can Father Declan envisage the marriage of priests and ordination of women in the future?
Women have probably much more natural characteristics or charisms for priesthood in terms of their emotional sensitivity, their kind of awareness around how people are, their ability to empathise. So it's a very plausible reason why women naturally possess that. I suppose it's a little bit like the gender quota when it comes to politics. I think if we only ordain women because there isn't enough men, then it is two things. It demeans women, and it also demeans the priesthood. Having said that, I have to go back and ask, what's God asking us to do now? One of the arguments that the church will have is that when Jesus called the disciples, he called them as men. Now, why did he call them as men? And Jesus wasn't somebody that subscribed to social norms because they were social norms, either because he believed them or he didn't. So he was a radical thinker. He wasn't afraid to think outside the box. He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. He wasn't afraid to be of his own mind. So he wasn't a conformist. So why did he not? And I don't know the answer to that. In terms of the marriage of priests, I know that if I were married and had a wife and children now, that the demands that would be made of me in my priesthood, I probably have to have the time that I would spend in my ministry to be able to devote it to my family. Because literally I could start in the morning my first call came in at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I could still be on the job at 11:30 that night. Now, I don't want to say always every day, but that could happen. How could I possibly be a husband and father and also be that committed to the church? So something would have to give. And that's not to say that it couldn't give. And then naturally, particularly when I see fathers with their children, there's something about that always say tears at me, but touches me to see a father with his child. You realise, you never share that moment, that this is your child, and the joy of being able to share those moments. And yet, though, the fact that I'm not married gives me a huge freedom, because I have the freedom to minister without thinking, God, I should be at home, or I'm meant to pick up the kids, or I'm meant to be there for my wife. I have all of that freedom, that I can devote myself to this solely. When I was ordained, I knew that the priesthood that I was being ordained into would demand of me to live as a celibate. But when you want something bad enough, you don't look at the price. So while, no more than what I said about everything else, the door is never closed. As it is now, it works for me. How it'll be in 10 years' time and how I am in 10 years' time, I'll have to come back and ask me.